So, for today's topic, I am so excited. I'm so excited to be talking about elephants because these are my favorite animal. When it comes to wildlife, I love elephants. A month ago, I was on a game drive with my friends, and then we were surrounded by a herd of elephants. I was a bit scared. It's strange how a vet can be scared. Yeah, but then I looked at the elephants, they were relaxed. And the people in the car, they were also relaxed. And then I wondered, how do these animals change from being like relaxed, gentle to being aggressive? What happens for them to change? I don't know. We'll find out today. Okay, let's think about savannah elephants, like desert elephants. These desert elephants, they always find their way to where the water is. How do they do that? They always remember their way to and from. How does that happen? You know, they can even pass it in generations. How do they do that? I also don't know, but I'm very curious to learn. And I'm excited that today we have three incredible speakers, people who have done a lot when it comes to elephants. They have like all the three people hold PhDs in ecology, and they've done a lot of work in elephants. So we have Dr. Luce. Dr. Luce will explain to us the social structure of elephants, how each elder elephant have their own role in the herd. And then we'll have Dr. Mike. Dr. Mike will talk about the vocal communication between elephants, how elephants communicate when they are together and when they are far from each other. How do they do that? And then we have Dr. Michelle. Dr. Michelle will talk about the self-awareness of elephants and how they solve problems. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you one thing. When it comes to elephants, you can never get a group of incredible speakers more than these ones, the ones that we have today. And this, I'm telling you, mark my words. With these few remarks, I would like to welcome our speakers. As they will be talking, please feel free to use the chat box. You can type your questions, all those questions that you're curious about elephants, type them in. You'll be given an opportunity to ask your questions, or I'm going to read them for you. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Dr. Luce.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, a real honor to be here and to be speaking with Michelle and Mickey as part of this evening. Thank you very much, Stella, for the introduction. So as Stella said, what I'd like to try and do tonight is just give a sort of very, very brief overview of what we know so far about wild savannah elephant intelligence. And I say so far because it's very much in the early stages of investigation and discovery, I would say. There've been some fantastic long-term studies of elephants in East Africa in particular, and also in Southern Africa. So we've learned a lot about elephant social systems and social structures, but we're really probably only just beginning to scratch the surface in terms of their intelligence and their minds. So just a very brief overview of the social structure of elephants. I imagine most of you who've sort of been lucky enough to see elephants in the wild will be familiar with some of this. Even if it hasn't been formally explained to you, you'll sort of have seen things like this. The basic unit of elephant society is the mother and her calf. And then related females will group together in a family. So adult sisters or adult mother and daughter elephants will stay together in a family unit with their dependent offspring. Adolescent bulls, as they reach maturity at around between the age from about the age 10 to 14, they'll start to spend less time with the family and more time with other bulls, other males, hanging out on their own, getting to sort of develop their own male society. And then these family groups of related females will also have sort of different levels of interaction with other family groups. So there might be what we call third tier interactions or bond groups, where perhaps it might be two sisters or an aunt and a niece who then join together sometimes and split apart. So there's a lot of sort of coming and going in elephant society, which is important to remember for things I'm going to talk about in a minute. But essentially that mother calf offspring, mother offspring bond is really critical. Ooh. There we go. So the first thing I suppose we should establish is why do we think that elephants might be smart? Well, the obvious thing is if you look at the size of their heads, they have a very large brain. It's the largest absolute brain size of any land animal. It can weigh up to about 6.5 kilos in adult male African elephants. That very intense social structure that I was talking about, a lot of social interactions between elephants, is often an indication in other animals of intelligence. So we see that in things like great apes or dolphins and whale species. And they're also very long-lived. So the elephants can live up for over 60 years, have a very similar life history to us, a long period of juvenile dependency or childhood, as we would call it. Calves are dependent on their mothers for nutrition for the first few years, but then socially dependent on their mothers until they reach adolescence. And as I say, the female calves will stay with their mothers for the rest of their lives. So there's this sort of long period where they're potentially learning from their elders as well, which all might indicate that we're dealing with a quite special species here. So I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of the kind of work that I've been involved with for the last 20 years or so. I'm not sure if I took the slide out. Yeah, sorry. Most of my work I've been doing in the Amboseli Elephant Research Project in Kenya, working with ATE, the Amboseli Trust for Elephants, which was started by Cynthia Moss back in the early 1970s. So I've been very lucky to work with that population, and then I've also been doing some work with Michelle in South Africa in the APNR. So very lucky to work with these long-term, well-established elephant research projects. And through this work and work of my colleagues like Karen McComb, who I think you'll probably hear more about again with Mickey's talk, we've been learning quite a lot about the social knowledge of elephants. So that's just sort of what they know about other elephants in their society, in their population. So for example, Karen did a lot of work playing back the contact calls, which are those long, low rumbles that you've probably heard elephants make. And playing back the contact calls of different elephants to known elephants in the Amboseli population, she was able to show that elephants can tell if a contact call is being made by someone they know or if it's from a stranger. So they're able to differentiate between their friends, their familiar associates, and the strangers, just from hearing the voices alone. Which, if you think about it, is something that we do quite a lot as well. We can recognize people from their voices, just from hearing them on the telephone, for example. We might know who it is we're speaking to, even if we haven't seen their name come up. But it's a very sort of useful, very important form of social knowledge. But one of the really interesting things that Karen found in doing this work was that some families were better at doing this than others. And the key thing that she found was that the families that were led by an older female were much better at doing this. So there seemed to be a situation where families that were led by an older matriarch, so who had a longer life, a longer time to learn and acquire this information, was much better at knowing if this elephant group is friend or stranger. So again, a really sort of interesting and important finding there that we'll come back to. So just talk a little bit about some of the work that I then did after, following on from Karen's work. So having shown that they can recognize that they know someone or they don't know someone from the sound of their voices, we were wondering how else elephants might be able to tell if someone is a friend or a stranger. And obviously hearing sounds are very important to elephants. You can tell that partly by the size of their ears. But the other really important sense for elephants is their sense of smell. So we wondered if they could perhaps use cues in their urine to recognize other individuals. One of the reasons why we thought about doing this is because, as you've probably seen yourself, if you've seen elephants, as they're walking along, they're sniffing things all the time, and they often will spend quite a long time sniffing piles of urine left by other elephants. So we were just wondering if perhaps there are cues in that urine that could tell them something about the other elephants that have been in the area. So I spent 3 or 4 months of my life driving around after elephants and picking up piles of urine into an ice cream tub, as you can see there. It was a very glamorous period of my life, but one that I greatly enjoyed. And essentially what we'd do is make a note of who had just urinated in a spot, go collect that urine, and then drive around and present that urine to other elephants. We did this in a few different ways. Sometimes we did it to other elephants in the same family that weren't present in that particular location at the time. So you remember I said that sometimes elephants can separate from their individuals. You know, they can break off for a little while and then come back together later on. So we would present urine from individuals from the same family, but who weren't together at the time, or we would present urine to individuals from a completely different, unrelated family. And hopefully I can show you a video of the kind of reaction we got. So I'd collect the urine. There was a lot of guesswork involved in this experiment, I should say. We'd collect the urine and then drive forward. And you can just see, hopefully down here, I hope you can see my cursor. We'd present the urine. Here I thought we were going to miss her. I'd guessed she was going to come on this path, but she didn't at first. And then she really helped me out. And you'll see from the swing of her trunk that she's really investigating that pile of urine. So this elephant here is called Barbara. Sorry, this is Beatrice, and the urine came from her mother, Barbara. So that's a mother-daughter relationship there, 2 adult females, but Barbara wasn't present at the time. And you'll see that Beatrice was then quite interested in that urine deposit. When we presented urine from a completely unrelated family, the elephant showed absolutely no interest whatsoever. There was none of that trunk-reaching behaviour that you saw Beatrice do there. So that indicated to us very clearly that elephants are able to recognise their family members from the urine, because they only ever showed interest in the urine that came from their own family members. We then took that experiment one step further to ask if they can actually, as well as just recognising that this is someone I'm related to, do they know specifically who the urine has come from? Is there a label in the urine that says this is from Beatrice or this is from Barbara? We did this by taking advantage of the way elephants, as you can see in this picture, often walk in very long straight lines. And although they can be in one long straight line, there can be a gap between them. So you might have a few individuals from the family walking here and then a 100-meter gap and another 5 or 10 elephants walking behind them, for example. We would wait for an elephant in the back group to urinate, collect the urine, and then quickly rush forward in the Land Rover and present it to the group of elephants at the front. And when we did that, the elephant at the front showed extreme amounts of surprise. If we presented an elephant, if this elephant at the front had urinated and we presented an elephant at the back with urine, there was no surprise. So by looking at the different reactions of the elephants, when the situation was normal, they were just passing over urine from an elephant who was in front of them and therefore could have urinated there in front of them. There was no surprise, they just carried on. But when the urine in front of them came from someone who was actually behind them, the elephants showed a lot of surprise, which again indicated to us the only way they would have been surprised is if they knew that that elephant was Barbara and she's behind me. How can her urine possibly be in front of me? So from the reaction of the elephants, we were able to conclude that not only does the urine give them a clue as to it being a member of their family, they know specifically who that member of their family is, and they're keeping track of where those individuals are in relation to themselves. So I found this particularly interesting, remarkable result. I always liken it to, if you imagine taking your children to the supermarket. I struggle to keep track of 2 children in a supermarket. These elephants are keeping track of 10, 15, 20 other individuals walking along a line for several kilometers with them. So I think a pretty nice indication of the kind of intelligence that we're dealing with elephants here. So that's just to sum up what I've just been saying. So we now know from that experiment that elephants can recognize their family members from urine, and they're keeping track of the position and the presence of those family members in relation to themselves, which, as I say, is quite an impressive sort of task of memory and processing. Another thing that we found out about elephants, well, I shouldn't say we have found out about elephants, but I think another thing that's very obvious about elephants, and again, I'm sure for those of you who have had the pleasure of spending time with elephants in the wild, you'll have noticed how much they help each other, how much they like to interact with each other and are constantly helping each other. And by looking at the way they do this and the kind of interactions that elephants have, to predict the help that other individuals need. So, for example, two nice illustrations here of the way elephants will often help calves out of muddy banks or wells that they've got stuck in, for example. Based on that, we were able to conclude that elephants show sort of great levels of empathy. They seem to understand the emotions and the goals or the desires of other individuals, which sounds very commonplace for us, I think, but is the kind of intellectual processing that hasn't actually been shown in that many other species. Again, it is known for a lot of primates, but not many other animals beyond that. So just to sum up the sort of whirlwind tour of what we know about elephant social knowledge, we know that they can differentiate between strangers and familiar elephants, and specifically the older, more experienced elephants are better at doing that. We know that they can recognize and keep track of their individual family members, and we know that they have some knowledge of other individuals' emotions or desires. We also wanted to think about what elephants understand about their environment around them, not just in terms of their fellow elephants, but in terms of the actual local setting where they live. One thing that became very obvious to us as we were working in Amboseli, and the people working, the Elephant Research Project team that have been working in Amboseli for a long time was very aware of, is that the elephants there seem to show a very particular fear of the local Maasai, in particular the Maasai Moran, the warriors. And they predicted that one reason for this is because generally in Amboseli, the Maasai have been a very positive influence for the elephant population. It's a very stable and well-protected elephant population there in Amboseli, largely thanks to the resident Maasai. But occasionally, as part of their progression from into warrior status, the Maasai will spear an elephant. So there is occasional sort of conflict between the Maasai and the elephant. We conducted this study back in the early 2000s, 2007. And at that time, things may well be very different now. But at that time, that sort of conflict really only existed between the elephants and the Maasai people. Another group living, another Kenyan group living around Amboseli were the Kamba people. But at that time, there was very little conflict between the elephants and the Kamba. So we wanted to find out if this fear that the elephants seemed to show towards the Maasai really was specific to Maasai people, or if it was sort of just a general response to anyone that lived around them. And we did that by comparing the elephant reactions to the scent of clothes, these red shukas that had been worn by Maasai warriors, or red shirts that had been worn by Kamba men, or red shirts that hadn't been worn by anyone. So we'd take a shirt that had been worn by the appropriate person, laid it out in the environment, and then just observed the elephant's reaction to that. And if I can start this at the right place. Hopefully, it's a very fuzzy video, I'm sorry, but hopefully you'll be able to see in this video. So the elephant lifting, this is a response to a shirt that had been worn by Kamba men. It's very fuzzy, I'm sorry, but you can just see there, the elephants are raising their trunks, sniffing. So they're aware of the smell. They've noticed the shirt and they're thinking about it. And they're sort of investigating. And then someone decides, something's not quite right. I don't really like this. We should move away. So they turn around and they move away with a reasonable amount of haste, but certainly I wouldn't say panic. You know, there's just something not quite right in their environment. They don't really like it. And so they move off. What you'll see in this video is the response to a shirt that a shuka that had been worn by the Maasai. So a cloth that smelt of Maasai warriors. You see the first trunk goes up and immediately all the elephants start moving. It becomes very blurry, but they're running. They're running fast, they're running far. It was, to be honest, not the nicest running these experiments because it was very apparent that we were causing the elephants a reasonable amount of distress in presenting these shirts to them. But essentially, I promise this is the only graph in the talk, but essentially you'll see that basically the kind of shirt that we put out for them, there was no difference in how long it took the elephants to smell it. So it wasn't about how strong the scent was. But when the elephants detected a cloth that had been worn by Maasai men, they ran much faster, they ran much further away, and they took a lot longer to relax in response to the Maasai instead of the Kamba. So that showed us, for the first time, it was evidence that these elephants, sorry, what's happening? It's the first evidence that elephants are able to differentiate different human ethnic groups based on their scent, the scent cues of people alone. And Karen McComb again, who did the work with the contact calls as well, then followed up on this work and was able to show that elephants are also able to differentiate the languages of Maasai and Kamba men, and also that elephants can differentiate the threat posed by different lions, for example. So lions in Amboseli are not a huge threat to elephants, but groups of male lions will occasionally attack calves. And when she played back the lion roars of either from a female lion, from a single male lion, or from a group of male lions, and measured the responses, she showed that the elephants responded very appropriately by not being that bothered by the female, but being very bothered by the group of male lions. But again, like her earlier work, she also showed that the older matriarchs were much better at this. So the families that were led by an older female, again with more life experience, were much better at responding appropriately and protecting the calves when there was a group of male lions roaring. So from that, we were able to show that we sort of sum up by thinking that in terms of their environmental knowledge, elephants are very good at differentiating between different threats that come from humans, and they can do that based on the smell of humans, but also the sound of humans. And they can also determine different predatory threats based on differences, you know, how threatening a situation is based on the number or the sex of that predator. They react very appropriately for the specific threat that they're encountering. And again, importantly, the age or experience improves those reactions in the elephants. So being older and having more life experience seems to allow for better, more appropriate responses in the family. So I just want to end by thinking briefly about why does all this matter? I mean, apart from allowing us to run some, have a marvelous time with the elephants in Amboseli, what is the importance of all of this? You heard a little bit from John earlier about the rise of conflict between humans and wildlife. And that's particularly prevalent, I think, with elephants, not just in East and Southern Africa, but also across India, across the sort of all the range states where different elephant species exist. Elephants can cause an extreme amount of damage, whether that's damaging houses and infrastructure, whether that's destroying crops or destroying fences. I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea of this, that elephants can be very destructive. There's also, I think, increasing number of reports about aggression from elephants. Particularly those of you in Southern Africa will be familiar with the situation in Pilanesberg, for example, where the elephants have been particularly aggressive at points. The bull in this was in Pilanesberg. I would just like to say nobody was hurt in the car from this photo, and that bull wasn't. I think he wasn't being particularly aggressive. Obviously, I'm sure it didn't feel great for the people in the car, but he was probably more just scratching and playing. But there have been some very heartbreaking aggressive incidents in some populations. One of the possibilities as to why this is happening could be something to do perhaps with inherited trauma. So Salah mentioned earlier about the idea of elephants learning and passing down information through generations. And whilst that's generally probably a very good thing, learning where to feed, what to eat, where the water sources are, it's also possible, and something that we're looking at now with our research, that actually another thing they're passing down are these levels of aggression and the sort of responses to trauma that the elephants are experiencing. It's possible, and I'm not trying to make excuses for the elephants, but I think it's certainly possible that one of the reasons there is such an increase in aggression is because we are altering their social structures. So if we are going in and damaging that very hierarchical, well-established social system that I was describing right at the beginning, in doing so, we could be taking away a lot of the opportunities for elephants to learn appropriate behavior. And when we do that, we could then be encouraging very inappropriate behavior to perpetuate. If you think, for example, the elephants in Pilanesberg and some other reserves across Southern Africa, they were populated by the cull juveniles. So elephants that were spared from the culling operations in Kruger and then sold to these reserves and essentially left there as juveniles to raise themselves. I don't think anyone would be surprised if, for example, a group of children were left in a house with no adult supervision for the rest of their lives if they grew up with slightly inappropriate behavioral responses. And I think it's possible that's what we've done with some of these elephant populations as well. So we've altered their behavior and sort of essentially reduced their social functioning by disrupting their social systems, their social hierarchies, and their opportunities to learn. We've got some evidence for this, for example, in the Samburu population of Kenya that was heavily hit by poaching, both in the 1990s and then from the early 2000s up to about 2014. Schifra Goldenberg's work has shown that those orphans that survived the poaching epidemic there have sort of much reduced fitness. They try very hard to fit back into society, but they're not as good at being elephants essentially as the individuals that were raised in a more stable family structure. And again, work by Graham Shannon and Karen McComb, comparing the responses of those elephants in Amboseli that you'll remember I said have this very intact social structure versus elephants in Pilanesberg in South Africa that were raised as cull orphans without appropriate adult models. And those elephants in Pilanesberg show greatly reduced social and environmental knowledge. They don't show the same kind of appropriate responses to the calls of other elephants or to the calls of lions that we see in Amboseli. So there's definitely evidence that we're reducing their knowledge, we're reducing their ability to have learned about their environment from those elders that have information. So I think we're sort of working under the premise now that the elephants need those elders, then they need an intact society to function and to behave appropriately. And so then what we're going to try and move on to and look more at is how we can repair that and to try and reduce some of these levels of aggression and improve the coexistence between elephants and people from now on. So that's all I want to say, apart from thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much to all my collaborators.